Welcome to Monday Morning Coffee with Inside the Firm. Each week, our hosts will be interviewing local, regional, and national business leaders to give you an inside peek into how they lead their business to success in the ever-competitive business climate.
Welcome to Monday Morning Coffee with Inside the Firm. Today I have a very special guest, a man I've been following for a while on LinkedIn. I'm very excited about him. Patrick Risk is a visionary leader with over 15 years of experience driving global transformations and organizational redesigns. He has a proven track record of creating billions of value through strategic planning, project management, and process improvement across industries like technology, healthcare, and nonprofit sectors. Patrick has led initiatives that save billions of dollars, improved organizational efficiencies, and developed new systems to streamline operations. He's currently an associate at Northmarq and serves on various nonprofit boards. Patrick holds multiple degrees, including an MBA, and is certified chaplain with passion for service and improving communities worldwide. Patrick, welcome to the show.
Thank you. It's great to be here. I really appreciate it.
Yeah. Before we get into what you do right now, though, I'm always curious with folks. Tell us how you got here. Are you from a family of entrepreneurs? Where does your spirit come from?
Yeah, that's a great question. I mean, I definitely I like that in terms of a family spirit of entrepreneurs. I love that. My mom has always had her own business, and my dad as well. And so I saw there definitely is that kind of spirit. They were in more like multimedia. And so I don't know how I kind of stumbled into the kind of line of work I've primarily been involved in terms of like management consulting work or a lot of planning work as well. I was a planning manager at the LDS Church, oversaw meeting house planning and operations. And so it's just kind of one of those things, life just kind of takes you and you just kind of I don't know if it's following the path of least resistance or it's the path that you were always meant to take, but you kind of end up stumbling into the area that you are. And that's kind of how I've gotten to where I am, really.
Yeah. Your posts are some of the best ones on LinkedIn, I think, for me and my audience. This is largely an architecture related podcast. We have a lot of architects that listen, a lot of contractors, a lot of builders, stuff like that. And we're always working with the planning and zoning departments, and you have some excellent takes on that. And so my first question for you, in regards to those things, are what do you think is the biggest flaw in current zoning laws, and how can they be reformed to encourage more progressive urban development, more better development?
Yeah, that's a great question. I think the biggest flaw that I see in many ways is, and it's not necessarily, I mean, I hate painting anybody as an enemy or against progress or that type of thing, but I think for the most part planning is not planning. It's reactive. We actually most people don't do very good planning. It's just reacting to either public sentiment or what's already been done. And so really, if we had good strategic conversations about what outcomes do we really want in our community, then you can have some actual serious conversations about, well, what does it take to get there? Because I'm a strong believer that built environment does have a direct correlation and impact on behavior. And so we really should be asking those questions of, okay, what type of community do we want? What type of behaviors do we want? What type of people do we want in our community? And again, those outcomes. And then you can really start, planning strategically of how are you going to get there. And I think if we did that, we would have much different communities, because obviously we want to be building, communities separate. We want to be building cul-de-sacs and communities separated by, there's just so many things that we would be doing differently if we actually looked at, kind of the outcomes we truly wanted in the community.
I agree, but I'm going to throw you a curveball here. So
yeah.
I'm a architect, builder, developer. I think we introduced ourselves in that way just when I contacted you initially, which was months and months ago. But like, one of the things I noticed that happens is we have these community discussions, and specifically in the town I run one of my businesses in Longmont, Colorado. It's in Boulder, Colorado. It's very progressive, for better or for worse. and they're interested in, the city's interested in density, and so are the citizens, right?
Yep.
And but the problem is like they say one thing out of this one corner of their mouth, and then out of the other corner, then once the reality sets in, it's like they're flippant about it, right?
Yep.
So we're doing right now in the as architects, one of the most contentious infill projects in town. It's huge. It's going to be like 60, 70 different, 60 or 70 units, single family, and they're supposed to be attainable, not affordable, but attainable, right? For your middle to middle upper class
Yep.
folks. The Our city council and the citizens got together for years to revise the zoning codes so that because they hear affordability,
Yep.
attainability, and they go, yes, we want that, of course. We need people to wait tables. We need folks that are coming out of school to be able to start families, get into pursue the American dream, and get home ownership under their belts. And then all of a sudden, we have a pre-application meeting, and the public's invited to see what that really means. And all of a sudden, there's a lot of NIMBYism, and it's not
Mhm.
real.
Yep.
So it seems like a double-edged sword. How do you overcome that barrier, though, once you
Yep.
get to that part?
Yeah. No, I think you're spot on in terms of there's kind of theoretical, and it sounds good, but then, like you said, once you put pen to paper, then that's where people start saying, "Oh, well, I don't really want that, or I don't want those people in my neighbor, or that type of thing."
Yeah.
And I think, there's no. This sounds probably just too. I mean, it sounds more simple than it really is, but it obviously going to take time, and the more we can point to success stories, then I think the more you start changing public sentiment and feelings, because oftentimes everybody can point to a bad example of, yeah, well, you said you were going to achieve these outcomes and goals here, but what really happened is now we have this rundown community that is falling apart. It brought crime, it brought that type of thing, which can be the case sometime. But it's like it's pointing to good examples,
Mhm.
and then letting people start to kind of really see what and those adopted principles that we talked about or talk about in terms of quality community planning and mixed use housing and affordability and that type of thing. What does that actually mean? What does that actually look like? And being able to see the positive outcomes from that rather than the negative outcomes. And the more we can kind of educate the public and the more we can point towards, like I said, good examples, then I think the more it's going to be accepted. But obviously, that just takes time, and it's about changing perceptions and mindsets. And obviously, whenever you're dealing with changing hearts and minds, it takes time. And yeah,
Yeah, and a lot of patience by the developer. The
yeah,
developer we're working with for this is just like a saint. Like what a masterclass he's shown me in patience and perseverance and endurance. So yeah, I'm with you there. Um, one of the other things too, on a related note like this, is that there's always this balance that probably needs to happen, right? We can't. I think a lot of people in the communities are fearful of just huge developments, right? So how can they balance the need for housing, but at the same time do it maybe incrementally so it's a little bit more digestible?
yeah, that's something that I've really come to appreciate even more, as I've looked into it and studied more in terms of like exactly what you said, that incrementalism. And really, I think that is in many ways the key to, or the path forward and the key to success. Because what, I mean, if you look back at obviously how from the beginning of time, if you will, if how communities have built, it isn't as we do it now today in many ways, where we also have this big blank of land and we do this master plan and we build exactly to the master plan and we build to an end state, if you will. We Communities more built organically over time, adjusted and adapted according to the needs and even the technology or the people that live there. And I think we need to start getting back to that state. I don't know exactly how, in
Mm.
terms of, obviously in terms of all the regulations and the things we built up around, around community building and planning and development. But we need to be able to get more to that place of flexibility, where, as I need to, I can add an ADU, I can change my home, I can do things because I need to bring a parent home that is now, needs more care. Or when my kids grow up and move out, they can move into a place on my property. Or if I start a new business, I could start the business and have a little storefront on my property. Like those things where you can actually do incremental changes and adaptations on your property that kind of are within reason, but actually make the community richer and better. And I think that in many ways would do much more of solving this housing crisis we're in than if we just went out and built thousands of homes in, a field out somewhere, because that might solve the problem temporarily, but then we're going to be stuck with, horrible communities long term. That it's just, you know, we're not thinking, yeah, long term.
Well, and we're also not thinking about placemaking.
Exactly. Yeah.
So that's really where it turns to is like I like how you talked about you phrase, you're thinking about dense instead of density, if we're thinking about placemaking instead, and it's just part of the deal.
Yep.
How do you recommend people focus on that though? I mean, obviously they just first of all they're listening to maybe this show and they go, oh, I'm gonna maybe start using that language, but maybe there's some actionable items they can take when they go to present to city council or do the pre-application meetings and working with the community because ultimately you do have to notify the neighbors of what you're doing. This is just how it works with pre-application. So
Yeah. Yeah. I think I mean, obviously it's a change, a complete kind of a flip of how we look at things. And like you said, that's gonna require, you know, time for cities to start adapting that and changing. But right now, you obviously have to work within the parameters and the bounds that we currently have. And so I think it's just kind of continuing to elevate the conversation of, like you said, and like I've posted before, of, rather than talking about, units per acre or density. What are we talking about in terms of, again, going back to the outcomes? What are
mhm.
we talking about in terms of the placemaking, the community building, those outcomes? I think talking towards those, again, it's just kind of trying to elevate the conversation beyond just numbers on a paper or units per acre. It's what does that mean? What does that look like? What are we actually trying to create? And I think hopefully people can start looking at it differently in that way as we continue to try to elevate the conversation in that way.
Yeah, I love that elevating the conversation. And you just touched on a point earlier that I want to go back to, which is, the barriers, right? And like we're putting up these, we have to have a framework for development. I get that. We can't just do willy-nilly. There was a lot of previous developments and now like even I'm suffering from and folks that you probably work with, like especially when you do infill, you're the
Mhm.
last kid on the block. So there's multiple challenges that happen is like because of the previous developments that were approved way before even building or like planning codes were in place essentially like then all of a sudden there's the water issue almost every single time. It's like what do you do with water? The neighbors are going to hate you because like you're infill and it's a tight site and you're building in materials and all that kind of other stuff. But maybe we could start at the top. This is like city leaders are leading us towards new development plans, enforcing the rules, approving, disapproving, all the other stuff. How do you feel like what do you think is one of the biggest things that city leaders could do to shift
Mhm.
um, working better with all of us to create collaborative solutions? Because right now, and I'm only speaking on behalf of what we're doing in town here, is like, boy, it's sort of like the left hand is not talking to the right hand
Yep.
a lot, and it's confusing.
Yep. No, I think you're spot on. I've kind of had a mantra in my career for a long time that, if I know what you know and you know what I know, then we usually come to the same conclusion. Or most people are pretty reasonable. It's just usually we're coming at things from a different point of perspective, we have a different set of data that we're looking at. But if we can truly put our cards on the table, be transparent and open, then we can usually counsel together and come to really great decisions. Because again, most people are fairly reasonable. It's just you're usually just missing a point of data or something that they have. And once you can see that, then you can understand their perspective a little bit better. And so with that, what I always have tried to do in my career is just get people to the table. Let's just, again, show our cards, get around a table with the key stakeholders involved, and let's have an honest and thoughtful conversation. And so I think that's really what's needed here is between, the development community, public input and city leaders who are supposed to be representing the public, professionals in the planning and development space and architects, getting these key stakeholders together at a table and saying, okay, going back to what are those outcomes we're wanting to create? What are those issues we're facing as a community, both in terms of like costs, infrastructure, housing affordability, all these issues and things we're trying to address as a community? And how can we work together towards solutions? And I think if we actually did that and everybody put on their thinking caps and again, got the cards on the table, looking at the same set of data, then I think we would be coming up with pretty amazing, innovative solutions and ideas. And but it's just everybody kind of cuddles in their own corner and kind of tries to solve things on their own. Whereas, let's just get around a table and let's that's what like planning charrettes are all about. It's about kind of breaking down the barriers and working together towards solutions.
Yeah, those meetings are super helpful. We've had a project start and stop, start and stop, start and stop, and it's still sort of in limbo. Right in the middle of town here, we're literally trying to improve Longmont by taking away replacing a undesirable pawn shop for good development. And once we got key, it wasn't just getting planning and zoning involved. It was actually getting in like our downtown development authority involved, the mayor, and I was advising the developer because that's what we did too with our development, which wasn't as contentious. This one's a little bit more contentious, and it seems like once everybody's there and they're not siloed, then it's a better conversation for everybody. Totally agree. I know we were saying earlier that rephrasing and reformatting the word density, but I gotta ask you about hidden density. Because I'm doing one of those right now, and it's kind of a beautiful project. We're taking a 3-story, formerly brick and mortar, all commercial building, and we're converting it to mixed use. 2 top floors are going to be apartments. I'm really excited about the project. We're going to final inspections are tomorrow. Is that a version of the hidden density you're talking about? And I would love to hear other versions of this because I think that is actually one of the best nuggets for people to look at and think about.
Yeah, I think there's a huge opportunity there in terms of making density more palatable again to the NIMBY voices, if you will, of okay, what it is, again, it's understanding their perspective, what it is you're so opposed to, what scares you so much about density, and looking for solutions to make it more, again, palatable to them, of more acceptable. And I think hidden density is one of those options of, there's something to be said about obviously if you have a bunch of 2-story, single family homes and then you want to build a 3-story townhome that's a big huge box that's got like a flat roof line and maybe a rooftop deck and that type of thing. Yeah, that's kind of that's a big leap, and that doesn't really fit within the character of the neighborhood, and so logically they're gonna push back against that. But if you could get the same level of density and it's a 2-story type product that almost looks just like any other home in the neighborhood, besides maybe it's like a mansion home, if you will, or and there's like entrances on the front and the side and that type of thing. And it just blends in with the existing fabric of the neighborhood. Then you would think, and logically, you won't get as much pushback from that as long as you're addressing, concerns around parking and some of those things. And so it's just about how can we build density, add housing that's blending within the existing fabric of a neighborhood and is more, again, incremental in terms of that scale of growth and size, then I think, again, you're making density just a lot more palatable to those voices that would otherwise come out in opposition to it.
Yeah, yeah. Uh, we could. I would like to talk about a little bit commercial too. We've been focusing on housing and everything like that. But like and I just mentioned this phrase too a little bit 2 questions ago, or whatever. Is like the brick and mortar stores, right? There's a lot of decline that's happening. Um, we don't have to name names about big boxes that maybe are contributing, and the digitization of everything, right? Like
Yep,
I can just go to my phone and there's a certain app, and boy,
yep,
overnight stuff comes. It's pretty neat.
yep,
But at the same time, I realize the consequences of that.
yep.
And a lot of people do. So, how do you see urban revenue generation evolving in the future if there's this decline? Is it what we just kind of spoke about, or is it where do we go from here?
Yeah. No, I think that's another key component as well of, again, what are all what makes a great community? Obviously, great housing and affordable and then obviously, a nice shop to a local shop to go to, areas where you can have experience, a cafe, you can gather with people, obviously you want a place where you can work, you don't want to have to travel forever. And so all those, education, schools, churches, all the components of a community, really we need to be looking at and addressing all those. And so obviously retail and commercial is a huge component of that, but the game is changing in that way. Just like you said, brick and mortar is dying, and logically so. I mean, when you can, like you said, pull up your phone, I can order something, and sometimes it's same day delivery, and that's only going to increase as we can have drones that are coming in and
Yeah.
delivering it. And I mean, so the technology is only going to increase. And so, how do we address that? I think it's definitely looking at building our communities differently, and the retail commercial component becomes different. I know a lot of commercial centers, shopping centers are repurposing to be more like experiential type areas where you can go like mini golfing or like bowling or that. It's more kind of going to gather and experience and have a fun time than it is to go just shop because you'll do your shopping online. And so I think that's a component of it. I think, we're always still going to need some type of small, shops for groceries, that type of thing. And so I think it's just building smaller ones. We don't need as much space. And so I think, it's just kind of, again, looking at what is needed, what the market is demanding and saying is needed, and then just trying to build communities around that that's incorporating all of the various aspects of what makes a great community. And we're just kind of need to have to rethink the equation a little bit and the box because obviously the game's changed in terms of where we're at with what's needed for retail.
Yeah, but we can't give up on it.
Yeah.
100%, right? Right. Is a very integral part. If somebody from the city, whatever city, is listening to this, what is the first? What is if you can only give them one first practical step that they should take to embrace more adaptive and inclusive development strategies? What would that be?
Yeah, I think it's about um, meeting with industry players and listening. Obviously, that's always a key to solving any problem is listen more than you talk for sure. And so I think it's truly being open to ideas, feedback from the community and from industry experts, builders, and really understanding because I think too much we make enemies of people,
Yes.
and we need to realize that it's not greedy developers that are causing the problem, or it's not selfish cities that are putting their head in the sand, or it's not again, it's not us or them. It's not a versus, it's an us thing. Let's work together. And I think that would be my main message is just say, hey, start inviting some experts or some people with different points of perspective and view, and start listening, and start being open to ideas and suggestions of how you can maybe do things differently that will help your community take a big step forward.
Yeah. I've really noticed a pattern in people, and it goes beyond all of the things we're talking about. And it took me 42 years to finally kind of get to this conclusion. And maybe you agree, maybe you don't. It's okay. Is that I think people have the strongest opinions about things they actually don't know much about, or the
Mhm.
strongest opinions about people that they've never really met or talked to. And I
Yep.
would echo exactly what you're saying, Patrick, about that's really the first step, 100%, is to get everybody in the same room and and try to just get along for an hour
Yep.
and take the fear down and all of that good stuff. Patrick, you've been a fantastic guest. I knew you would be. I would love to probably have you on the show again at some point here, to talk again, especially as we move through this very interesting time period with you know high macro factors that are not really allowing for the kind of development we need to happen all throughout the
Yeah.
nation. So I got two questions for you, though, as we round up on the half hour. And the first one is, knowing what you know now, and if you could go back in time to when you first started your career, what is one piece of advice you give your former self?
I think exactly along the lines of what you were just talking about. If it's being okay with not knowing something, not being afraid to say I don't know, or of realizing that just being kind of vulnerable in that way. I think sometimes we, feel like if we say we don't know, then it's going to impact our career or somebody's going to, but really it's kind of like coming to the table with what you do know and then being willing to admit what you don't, and then finding the people that do know what you don't know and leveraging those relationships, because that's how we become stronger together. It's when you kind of find out what your strengths are, you lean into those strengths, and then you allow those areas where you're weak. You find people that can fill in those gaps for you. That's kind of, I think, the key to be successful, is just creating that community of people that kind of fit together as a puzzle. And where I'm strong, they might not be strong, and where I'm weak, they're strong.
Yeah. Thanks so much for that. I love that. I'm 100% with you. Last one is, where can people follow you if they want to get in touch with you and network?
Yeah, so I mean, I'm pretty active on LinkedIn. I do a lot on Facebook as well, but that's more my personal side. So I think they can just connect with me on LinkedIn. And yeah, I'm always, connecting with people on messaging through there, and meeting, and it's a great way to kind of just kind of expand your network, and get to know what great work other people are doing in this space.
Yeah. Yes, sir. Okay. Thank you so much for your time, Patrick. We appreciate it.
Okay, thanks so much. I appreciate it.